Hello, this is Grayhawk, and I'm a Louisiana Native American Storyteller, and I'm of the Homa and Choctaw Nation, and I'm up here on Mount P, and I'm going to tell some stories. In fact, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the stick that I'm holding. The stick that I'm holding actually has a story to it. It's called a talking stick or a respect stick. We use this and we pass it around when we're telling stories, or if we're in a circle and we're talking. The only person that's allowed to talk is the person that's holding the stick. So it gives everybody a chance to speak. It also gives everybody a chance to give everyone the respect to be able to be listened to. So this talking stick is very important to us, and I think everybody should use it. So that way, at least everybody gets a chance to say their piece and say things that they need to say so other people can listen. This stick actually has a story to it. I was about 15 years old, so that's a long time ago. And I was on the Mississippi River, and not too far from where I live, and I saw this stick floating in the Mississippi River. Now, it was off at a distance, but it caught my eye. And I followed it and kept walking and walking. I must have walked about 2.5 miles. Finally got close enough to the bank that I could grab it. And I noticed something that was unique about this stick. If you look at the stick really closely, it's got teeth marks all the way across. So that meant that this stick came from a place up the river where a beaver cut this and dropped it in the river. You know, a beaver cut it and the river took it when it overflowed. So a lot of energy in this stick. So I use this stick when I'm either telling stories or when I'm sharing with my friends about different things and giving everybody a chance to talk. But today I'm going to use this stick and I'm going to hold it while I tell you a story. This story happened, I guess it could happen yesterday, it could happen 100 years ago, it could happen at any time, but this story is about a young boy. Now, every day this young boy would go to his grandmother's house, and he would run down that road. He'd run down that dirt road, and he'd get to his grandmother's house, he'd knock on that door, she'd open the door, he'd go in, and she'd tell him stories, they'd have fun, they'd play, and all of a sudden one day, he became 10 years old. Now, in the Native American culture, 10 years old is very important. Now, he didn't really know that much about what was getting ready to happen. But when his grandmother answered the door, she opened the door. She looked down and he says, "What are you going to tell me today, Grandma?" She says, "I'm going to tell you one thing. It's going to be a different time now." And he looks at her, because today you're going to have to find something. And he looks at her again like, what is she talking about? He says, "What do I need to find, Grandma?" She says, "You need to find an ant pile. And that ant pile has to be about that tall, about 2.5 feet tall. Now, when you find that ant pile, it's going to be underneath a roof that's made by nature. And then under that roof will be a chair that is made by nature. And you will sit in that chair underneath that roof and you will watch that ant pile. But you have to find that ant pile." And he looked at her, 10 years old. He looked at her like, what am I doing this for? But he loved his grandmother, and so he took off out that door. Now, this time he started to run, but he stopped, because what did he have to do? He has to find that ant pile. Well, he's walking along very slowly, and he looks over, and there's a big palmetto bush. And underneath that palmetto bush, he sees something coiled up underneath the palmetto bush, and it was beautiful. It was like a tan and light white color. And he got close to it. When he lifted up that last branch with that leaf, he noticed it was a copperhead. It was a copperhead snake, and he's very poisonous. And he just froze stiff. But he looked down at that snake, and that snake did not move 1 inch. And he looked down at the snake, and the snake looked up at him. And he crouched down, and he watched that snake, and that snake watched him. For the longest, he looked at that snake. Snake didn't move. Snake didn't even come near him. That snake just looked at him. And he looked down at that snake and he noticed something, how beautiful that snake was. He looked at the colors, he looked at the markings, and he said, "My God." He says, "The snake didn't even attack me." And he thought, maybe it's because I didn't attack him. But he sat there and he watched that snake for a while. But then he started thinking, oh my goodness, I got to find that ant pile. He looked down at the snake. He said, "Yokoki, thank you, snake." And he left, took off. And he took off walking slow again. He's looking for that ant pile. As he's walking down that dirt road, he's looking everywhere, and he sees a bunch of mulberries. He sees mulberry bush. He sees these plants, beautiful plants. But behind the plants What does he see? He sees colors, man, unbelievable colors. So he sticks his head through that bush, and when he does, there's, oh my goodness, there's beautiful flowers, every color you can imagine, but flying around those flowers were butterflies. Beautiful butterflies. Some of them landed on his nose. They were by him. He could not believe how beautiful it was. He stood there for the longest, and he watched the plants, he watched the colors, he watched the butterflies. He said, that's beautiful. I've never seen this before. He sat there for longest. It was like hypnotizing him. But then he realized something. I got to find that ant pile. He looked at the flowers, and he looked at the butterflies and said, Yokoki, thank you, brothers, and he took off. Started looking for what? That big old ant pile. As he's walking along, he sees some high grass. And at the base of that high grass, what does he see? He sees something sitting down right in that high grass. He's wondering, what is that thing? He gets close and he realizes it's a rabbit. He got close and the rabbit backed up a little bit, but it sat down, and he sat down and he watched the rabbit. And the rabbit watched him, and he realized how beautiful that rabbit was. And he didn't scare that rabbit because he didn't do anything to hurt that rabbit. That rabbit wasn't going to hurt him either. They just looked at each other and they were friends. It happened for a while where he thought, I got to go. And he stepped back and he stepped on a stick. When he did, he almost fell and the rabbit took off running. The minute that rabbit ran, out of nowhere, out of that high grass, a bobcat came and grabbed that rabbit and drug him off. The boy went, whoa, I had never seen that before. It freaked him out. Oh my goodness. But he thought, I gotta find that ant pile. So he kept walking, and it was hot. And he said, I'm gonna go rest. And he saw a huge oak tree in the distance. So he walked toward that oak tree because he was gonna sit in the shade. When he got to that old oak tree, and they had that big oak tree with that big covering, he went underneath there, and when he looked down, guess what he saw? That ant pile, right about there. He looked and he said, there's the ant pile. He looked at the tree and went, there's the roof, made by nature. And he looked down at the roots, and guess what? The roots made a perfect chair that he could sit in. So he sat in that chair that the oak tree made, and he looked at that ant pile. He looked at that ant pile, he looked at that. So you remember, he's 10 years old. Before you know it, he's going, He's 10 years old, he's bored. But then he notices something. He notices the ants are going in the ant pile, and he knows the ants are coming out of the ant pile. And he sees that, and he realized the ants going in were carrying things. And he realized when they came out, they were not carrying anything. They were bringing food to the big ant pile. Then he realized, look how small those ants are. And he looked how big that ant pile was. And he realized, my goodness, that's why they were bringing the food in there. There's so many ants because they built that ant pile. Not one ant could build that ant pile by itself. They had to work as a team to build that big of an ant pile. And the next thing he looked over and he saw a lizard was being dragged by the ants. Unbelievable. He just looked at it and could not believe that little bitty ants could drag a lizard like that. But there were a lot of them, and ants are very strong. And what were they doing? They drug him over, and they were bringing him for food. And he watched this, and he went, whoa, this is great. But then he realized it was starting to get late, and he looked at all the ants and said, Yokoki, thank you, my brothers. He got up, and he took off running. Well, the little boy ran all the way back to his grandmother's house, knocked on the door. She answered the door. She said, did you find that ant pile? He said, Grandma, I did find an ant pile, but let me tell you what I saw first. And he starts telling her about this thing that he saw in the palmetto bush. He talked about the snake, how beautiful it was that he saw it and it didn't hurt him. He looked at it and he found out how beautiful it was. He said, I've never seen that before. And she said, well, did you find the ant pile? And he goes, yeah, I did. And he said, well, wait a minute. I was walking along looking for the ant pile, and I saw something else. The mulberry bush, the bushes that the mulberries are. And behind those bushes, there were flowers everywhere, beautiful colors. And there were butterflies. I've never seen that before. I stood there for a while. They landed on my nose, my hand. Oh, it was beautiful. But did you find the ant pile? Yeah, I did. But before I found the ant pile, I was walking along the high grass, and I saw a rabbit. And I looked down at that rabbit, and that rabbit looked at me, and we shared, and we looked in each other's eyes, and it was great. And then I stepped on a stick, and I almost fell. And when I did, the rabbit took off. And the minute that rabbit took off, out of that high grass came a bobcat, got him, drug him up. I'd never seen that before. She says, really? Did you find the ant pile? Yeah, I did. And it was where you told me it was. It was under the oak tree that was made, or a roof out of that oak tree. And underneath that oak tree was that ant pile. And near that ant pile was a chair that was made from the roots. And I sat there and I watched it. I watched the ants go in. I watched the ants go out. I watched them work. All them ants worked. None of them sat down and didn't do anything. They all worked as a community. And I realized that they did have to work as a community because they were so small. And that big ant pile, if they wouldn't have worked together, it would have never happened. And then I saw them take a lizard. And they took that lizard down to feed all the other ants. It was unbelievable how they worked together as a team. And the grandmother said, was that good? And she said, did you ever see that before? He said, no. But what I get, you hadn't seen any of this stuff before. No, Grandma, it's the first time I've seen any of this. She said, every day you come to my house. You pass my house and you're 10 years old. And you mean you've never seen any of that? No, Grandma, I've never seen it. So in all the years you've been coming, never seen that. Why? Why did you see it today? What did you do different that you never did before? And he thought, and he thought, and he went, huh. I slowed down because I had to find the ant pile. Ah, you slowed down. So that meant that you slowed down enough to where you saw all these wonderful things around you. Yeah, Grandma. She says, huh. It kind of means that a lot of people, there are beautiful things around them all the time. Things around them that are around them every day, but they never slowed down enough to see it. So why did you see it today? Because you slowed down. Sometimes you have to do that. Well, he thought about that. Now think about this. People every day, they go around fast. They're always looking for something. And a lot of times they don't slow down enough to see the beauty that's around them. And that happens to a lot of our people. Now, a long time ago, that happened to that young boy. And you know what? That young boy asked his grandma that day, Grandma, what do you want me to find tomorrow? And that boy has been looking for those things ever since, and he's sitting right here in front of you. Thank you very much. Yoko Ki. That's the story about the ant pile.